Do you have SI joint pain? If so, listen up. In this week's episode of the Exercises Health Podcast, we are discussing 3 areas that you need to make sure you're strengthening if you have SI joint pain. We're going to cue our introduction and dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health Podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we are discussing SI joint pain, what you can think about from a workout perspective if you are experiencing SI joint pain, to make sure that your workouts are building the strength and function of your body to potentially help support the SI joint better. Now, we are not giving pain relief advice today, but we are giving you things to think about from a workout perspective. And if you are interested in experiencing some of what we're talking about today, if what we are discussing is intriguing to you and you want to experience muscle activation techniques for yourself, that is our specialty here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg. All you have to do to see our availability and schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment is go to our website, www.matschaumburg.com. On our website, you'll see a big green button that says Get Started. You can click that and schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. So today we are talking about SI joint pain. SI joint pain is a very common thing that many people experience, and oftentimes when it does come up, people are a little bit at a loss of what to do about it, because it's kind of at this awkward spot, kind of like low back, top of butt, not really sure exactly what's going on. It doesn't really feel like joint, it doesn't really feel like muscle, but it doesn't feel good either. And oh, by the way, if the idea that you have is, oh, I'll just take some time off and just kind of like sit around and do nothing, the sitting cannot feel so great, on that note as well. So it's like, okay, what do we go about? How do we actually make sure that we can keep being active, keep building our strength, and do so in a way that can help to support this area? That's what we're talking about today.
That's right. So let's start out with talking about where is your SI joint, because maybe you're feeling some stuff just like what Charlie said at the bottom of your back or the top of your butt, and you're like, well, what is this area? So if you've ever seen a skeleton, like at Halloween, and you see like the spine coming down, at the bottom there's like this bony bowl, and that is like your pelvis. So your bony bowl, it has 2 sides, and then there's a back. And the back is called your sacrum. Now, either side of that sacrum, it's like a little triangle. On your back side, it consists, the very bottom of that triangle is like your tailbone. And then up on the sides as it spreads wide, those joints where the sacrum meets the other bones of the pelvis, those are your SI joints. Now, the funny thing about these SI joints is that unlike other joints, it's not like we can say, oh, I have a tight hip, let me stretch it or massage it or exercise it or do whatever. It's harder to change this area because although it's a joint and it's clearly a joint to people like me and Charlie or other people that work with the body, it doesn't really feel like a joint back there. It's not like we can move it like other joints. So that is where your SI joint is. But good news for you, there are so many muscles that directly and indirectly control this joint, and that is a great place to start if you are having issues back there with your SI joint.
Absolutely. There are a ton of muscles in this area that can help to control the SI joint and that can influence the SI joint, because even though the SI joint is often said to be, like a locked joint, or it's a joint that, doesn't move at all, the fact of the matter is that there is some motion that can happen in the SI joint. And if there is a joint in an area, it's going to be crossed by muscles. There are muscles that can influence that joint. Now, here's the thing. There are a lot of ligaments there, and there's a lot of bony structures there. And when you're just relying on the ligaments or you're just relying on the bony structures to help support the SI joint, in other words, like the function of your muscles is not that great, it can be pretty uncomfortable. But what we've seen time and again using muscle activation techniques is getting the muscles that are supposed to be supporting the SI joint functioning better. All of a sudden, all those symptoms start to change. That ache that was there, that pain that was there, that's no longer the case, simply because the muscles that are around the SI joint are now able to support that joint better because they are functioning better. So what muscles need to be considered when we're talking about, muscles that can influence the SI joint? We're going to break it down into kind of 2 general groups. There are the muscles that are local to the SI joint, and then there are more what we'll call global muscles, or just muscles that are more, in different parts of your bodies, more away from the SI joint, but because of the mechanics of the areas where they live, they have actually a strong influence over the SI joint. And so this is going to come down to 3 separate areas that we want to make sure that you are focused on strengthening and improving the function of with your workouts and with muscle activation techniques if SI joint pain is something that you are experiencing.
Now, the first area we want you to jump into is making sure that you are doing a 360 strengthening of your hips. Now, hips are a very local area to the SI joints. So if you think about like when you have that bony pelvic bowl, the joint that's right below it is going to be your hip joint. So that's going to be things like your squats, your leg lifts, hip abduction, hip adduction. So the more that these motions through your hips are strong, the less instability that your SI joint will be like really contracting for and trying to make up for. So we want to see that you are strengthening through your hips, and many of these hip motions, specifically like deep hip rotators, if you've ever heard of muscles like your piriformis or your topical hip rotators like your glutes, these actually directly cross the SI joint. They literally control your SI joint. And just like Charlie said, a lot of times we think of the SI joint as a joint that doesn't move or a lock joint, but there is a little bit of motion that does happen in that SI joint. And so it is important that these muscles are strong so that that joint can move appropriately when your body is needing that motion.
Exactly, because the SI joint is the sacroiliac joint, which means it's made up of the sacrum and essentially the iliac crest, which then leads into the ilium, the ischial tuberosity, everything like that. Okay, so essentially it's, it is one half of your pelvis is what we're looking at, the sacrum and the ilium. Okay, those 2 bones combined make up the sacroiliac joint. All right, and so if there are muscles that attach onto the ilium anywhere or attach onto the sacrum anywhere, they have the opportunity to also cross the SI joint and to influence the SI joint. And that's exactly what we see with a lot of the hip muscles. In fact, I'm struggling to think of a hip muscle that doesn't attach onto one of those 2 bones, and thereby would not have any influence over the SI joint. Right now, being put on the spot, all of them do that, which means when you go and you strengthen the muscles of your hips, you have the opportunity for those muscles to not only get stronger, but help support that SI joint better. Okay, so that's the first area, is your hips. The second area is going to be your core, all right? And oftentimes the core is just thought about as like the abdominals, the obliques, but we are also extending this to the low back. And we're even going to bring it all the way up the torso into the upper back, muscles that attach onto the ribs, things like that. So essentially, if you think from where your shoulder blades are down to where your hips are, that area, there are so many muscles there that again, attach onto that iliac crest, that will attach onto the sacrum, that have the opportunity to influence that SI joint. And if they are weak, if they are dysfunctional, the SI joint can end up picking up more stress. And so making sure that you are strengthening your core through its 4 primary motions: trunk flexion, folding forward; trunk extension, arching backwards; side bend, which is going to be that lateral flexion, kind of like side crunches, side to side; and then trunk rotation, twisting, making sure that you are strengthening your muscles through those 4 different motions, and then that will bring about a kind of well-rounded strength throughout your entire core, throughout your entire trunk.
Now, the trunk that we just talked about and the hips that we talked about previously are very local to the SI joint. Now, this one area that we're going to jump into is an area that we work on all the time, and it is a more global or far away area, but it has such a direct, and it seems indirect, but we're going to show you why, but such a direct influence on how the SI joint is moving, especially if you're having SI dysfunction or symptoms in that area, and that is your feet. Your feet are going to be the muscles that cross your ankle. They live in your calves and then into your foot, like where your arch support, like where your arches are and where your toes are. Now, what's funny is like it seems so far away, but if you were to stand on your feet, and you can try this if you're at home or something, and you change the arches of your feet, like you lift your arches or you flatten your arches or you twist this way or you twist that way, you're going to notice that when you change your feet and you change the positioning of your feet or you change the contractions in your feet, it has a direct change in what's happening up your leg and into your pelvis. So for example, sometimes when people have really weak feet and they need to get them strengthened, they need to get some muscle inhibition in the feet taken care of, they're going to notice that they have to sit with their butt out and their back really arched. Or on the opposite side, they might be in a pelvic tucked position. Either way, it's not like one is good and one is bad. We want you in a position that allows the SI joints to be able to function properly, so that it's not giving you all these signals to your brain and having the muscles not work properly. So when we work on strengthening the feet, it has a direct change up the chain that impacts how that pelvis is handling forces coming from the foot.
Yeah, this is something that I noticed very distinctly within myself, that if I change my shoes away from like a barefoot minimalist shoe into a shoe that has more support, and if I've ever worn like when I've worn a very like stiff supportive running shoe, I take like 2 or 3 steps. I'm like, I have to get this off immediately. Not necessarily because of what I'm feeling at my feet, but because of what I'm feeling in my SI joints and in my low back. Like as soon as my feet get jammed up in these stiff, supportive, overly bulked up shoes, immediately I start to feel it in my SI joints. And so when the SI joints are starting to feel weird, starting to feel funky, yes, it can be something that's very local to them, but one area that we have seen time and again to have a tremendous influence over how the SI joints are feeling and functioning is the feet. Again, the stronger the feet are, the more appropriately they are moving, and the better those muscles are functioning, the more they are going to be able to minimize the forces that are coming up into that SI joint and allow the SI joints to move in the ways that they're supposed to move and not always feel like they're getting jammed up, getting locked up, things like that. So how do we go about doing this? Well, for us, the first step is going to be muscle activation techniques, because like we talked about, there are 3 different areas. We don't know which area for you is going to be like the biggest impact area for what you are experiencing as an SI joint symptom. Yes, the SI joint symptom is there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the muscles that are directly controlling the SI joint that are the issue. It could be something a little bit farther removed, up higher in the trunk, or even way down into the feet. But regardless, the symptom is there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the issue is there. So for us, we're going to start with muscle activation techniques. We're going to assess your body and figure out exactly which areas are going to be most impactful for you, and start to address the muscle dysfunction, the muscle inhibition that we are seeing in those areas using the MAT process.
In addition to MAT, you also need to be strength training. A lot of times when people come to see us, we do MAT and then we start to go into strength training, because we know that for muscles to stay strong, to stay active, to stay functional, and to stay working well, especially as we age, we have to be regularly challenging them. So we need to be regularly challenging all the motions of the hips, all the motions of the core, and all the motions of the feet. Of course, total body is what we always want to see, but if you are directly struggling with symptoms in your SI joint, definitely make sure and do like a close examination on, how am I really strengthening my hips? Am I biasing towards only working glutes? Am I not working the fronts or the sides or the insides? Look at that core work, and also look at your foot, ankle, and toe work.
Exactly. So if you're experiencing some kind of SI joint symptom, whether you'd call it pain, an ache, whatever it is, that is often a sign that the SI joint itself is not being supported by your muscles. Now, these muscles may be at the SI joint directly, or they may be farther removed, something more in the core, even up into the upper back, or way down into your feet. How do you know? You're not going to know specifically by the symptom. The only way to find out is to start to get your body assessed for this muscle dysfunction, this muscle inhibition, and that's exactly what we can help you do with muscle activation techniques. And then once we are able to address those muscles, get those muscles stronger and functioning better, that's where the more traditional strength training can come into play to really kind of increase the output of the muscles in those areas, so you can do more in your life without feeling like your body's breaking down and these symptoms are coming back. So if you would like to experience muscle activation techniques for yourself and are in the Chicagoland area, or willing to travel to the Chicagoland area, that is our specialty here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg. All you have to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to www.matschaumburg.com. On our website, there's a big green button that you can click that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know who has experienced SI joint pain in the past or is currently going through it right now, feels like they want to make sure that their body is tuned up, they're stronger, and they can be more resilient towards this SI joint pain, continuing to work out and do the things that they want without feeling like it's holding them back. Share this episode with them so they can understand the different areas that may be involved with what they're experiencing with this SI joint symptom and can start to do something about it as far as getting checked out by an MAT practitioner and starting to do more consistent strength training for those 3 key areas. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us and leave us a rating and review. Not only does it help people find our podcast when they're looking for information to exercise, it also helps them find our podcast when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us a 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.